secluded house in the middle of nowhere. A recent widow, Emily, is haunted by the sounds of something or someone stalking her. As her paranoia grows, she discovers a hidden door that leads to the unknown, only to be trapped inside. With her life on the line, Emily fights for survival against an unseen threat. But as the truth is revealed, she realizes that the threat is not just any malevolent entity. Will Emily make it out alive, or will her fears consume her? Watch as she battles her inner demons and tries to escape the house of horrors. Emily had always been a city girl, but after her husband Mark disappeared on a hiking expedition and was never found, she needed to get away. She couldn't bear to stay in the same house they had built together, the same neighborhood they had called home. It all felt like a constant reminder of her loss. So she found a house in the middle of nowhere. It was a small, cozy cabin nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but trees and wildlife. She thought the solitude would be good for her, that it would give her time to grieve and heal in peace. And for a while, it did. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, Emily began to feel a creeping sense of paranoia. She had always been a bit anxious, but this was something different. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that there was someone or something out there, just beyond the trees. At first, she tried to ignore it. She told herself it was just her imagination, that grief was playing tricks on her mind. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. She started to not sleep, and every creak or rustle outside sent her heart racing. Emily tried to rationalize her fear. Maybe it was just a wild animal, or a hunter passing through. But the more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that it was something else entirely, something sinister. She tried to distract herself, filling her days with busy work and hobbies. She took up painting and spent long hours in front of her canvas, losing herself in the colors and shapes. She read books, watched movies, and went for long walks in the woods. But no matter what she did, she couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched. One night, she was awakened by a sound outside her window. It was a soft tapping, like something was trying to get in. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been so scared in her life. With trembling hands, she reached for her knife and crept to the window. She peeked outside, but saw nothing, just the dark, dense forest stretching out into the night. For a long time, she stood there, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond her sight. She felt completely alone, vulnerable and exposed. Eventually, the tapping stopped, and Emily retreated to her bed, still clutching her knife. She lay there for hours, listening to the silence, waiting for something to happen. In the days that followed, Emily became more and more withdrawn. She stopped leaving the house, stopped painting and reading and watching movies. She just sat in the dark, listening to the sound of her own breathing. She was convinced that something was coming for her, something she couldn't escape. And then, one day, she saw something that confirmed all her worst fears. It was a figure, just a shadow really, moving through the trees. She couldn't make out any details, but she knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that it was coming for her. The tapping on her window at night continued. At first, Emily assumed it was just a branch knocking against the glass, but as time passed, she realized it was something else entirely. Sometimes, the tapping would move to another window or door, as if whatever was out there was trying to find a way in. As the weeks turned into months, Emily began to notice other strange things happening around the house. Lights would turn on or off without explanation, and appliances would start up on their own. She would wake up to the sound of the blender whirring in the kitchen, or the TV blaring in the living room, even though she was certain she had turned them off the night before. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was just a malfunction, that the wiring in the house was old and faulty. But the more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that it was something else entirely. Emily started to become extremely paranoid. She would spend hours sitting in the dark, listening for any sounds that might give away the presence of an intruder. Every time she left the house, she would come back to find things misplaced, as if someone had been rifling through her belongings. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a raccoon or a stray dog, she told herself, but deep down, She knew it was something more sinister. She felt like she was losing her mind. One night, Emily was awakened by a loud crash from the kitchen. She bolted upright in bed, heart pounding, and grabbed the baseball bat she kept under the bed. She crept through the dark house, inching towards the kitchen, ready to strike. When she got there, she saw that one of the kitchen chairs had been knocked over, as if someone had been sitting in it and then abruptly stood up. The tablecloth was askew, and there were dishes scattered all over the floor. Emily could feel her pulse racing in her ears, and she gripped the baseball bat even tighter. She searched the house from top to bottom, but found no one. There was no sign of a break-in, no evidence that anyone had been there except for her. From that night on, Emily began to feel like she was losing control. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped leaving the house altogether. She spent her days huddled in a corner, clutching her baseball bat and listening for any sounds that might give away the presence of an intruder. As time passed, her paranoia only grew. She started to see things that weren't there, shadowy figures moving in the corners of her eyes, or strange shapes lurking in the dark corners of the house. She heard whispers and footsteps, even though there was no one there. One day, Emily woke up to find a message scrawled on the wall of her bedroom. It was written in what looked like blood, although Emily couldn't be sure. The message read, "I'm still here." Emily couldn't take it anymore. The strange occurrences in her house had become too much for her to bear. She had to leave, to get as far away as possible from whatever was lurking in the shadows. She began packing her things, stuffing her clothes and other belongings into boxes and bags. As she worked, she tried to ignore the tapping on the windows and the strange noises coming from outside. But the more she tried to ignore them, the louder they became. Just when she thought she was done packing, Emily remembered a closet in the back of the house that she had never fully explored. It was always locked, and the realtor had never given her the key. She had assumed it was just full of old junk, but now she had a nagging feeling that there was something more to it. She went to the closet, and sure enough, the door was locked. But as she jiggled the handle, she realized that it wasn't locked as securely as she had thought. With a little effort, she managed to pry the door open. What she found inside was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was a small, hidden room, almost like a closet within a closet. There was a small bed in the corner, and a chair beside it. But the most unsettling thing was the walls, which were covered in strange symbols and drawings, as if they had been scrawled by someone in a trance. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she gazed at the walls. She couldn't make sense of the symbols, but she had a feeling they were meant to be a warning. She tried to back out of the closet, but as she did, she heard a loud click. The door had locked behind her. Panic seized Emily as she realized she was trapped in the small, dark room. She pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The tapping on the windows and the strange noises outside had grown louder, and she was sure that she was being watched. As she sat there, huddled in the corner, Emily tried to make sense of what was happening. Was it a ghost, an evil spirit, or was it all just in her head? Minutes turned into hours, and Emily began to feel like she was losing her mind. She tried to keep herself calm, tried to focus on her breathing and keep the panic at bay. But as time passed, she started to feel like she was suffocating. She needed to get out, to breathe fresh air, to escape whatever was in that house. Finally, the door opened. Emily rushed out. She stumbled to the ground, looking back to see if anyone was following her. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw Mark standing before her. At first, she thought that it was a hallucination, but she quickly realized that it was really him. Mark had been alive all along, and he had been the one who was tormenting her. Emily was both relieved and furious. She couldn't believe that he had put her through all that trauma. As Mark approached her, Emily stood up, ready to defend herself. He lunged for her, and Emily began to fight. Emily was no match for Mark's strength, but she was determined to fight for her life. They continued to fight until Emily found a sharp object, which she used to wound Mark. Mark fell to the ground, gasping for breath. Emily was terrified, but she knew that she had to escape. She ran to her car, got in, and drove away as fast as she could. Tears streamed down her face as she realized that her husband was truly gone. For the next few weeks, Emily stayed in a hotel, trying to cope with the loss of her husband and the trauma of what had happened. She couldn't go back to her old life. Everything reminded her of Mark. She was alone, with no family or friends to support her. Finally, she decided to move to another city and start a new life. She packed up her belongings and left, hoping that she could leave the memories behind. But she knew that she could never forget what had happened. As Emily drove away, she thought of the house in the middle of nowhere, where she had experienced so much horror. She realized that she had won the battle, but the war against her fears was far from over.